The stagecoach accident left Eleanor Whitmore stranded in the middle of the New Mexico territory with nothing but a torn traveling dress, a bruised shoulder, and a terror so deep it made her bones ache. It was July 1878, and the summer heat beat down mercilessly on the overturned coach, its wheels still spinning lazily in the dust, while the driver worked to calm the panicked horses that had caused the whole disaster. Eleanor pressed herself against a boulder 20 feet away, trembling as those massive beasts stamped and snorted, their eyes rolling white with fear. She had been afraid of horses since childhood, since the day her father's stallion had reared and trampled her beloved dog right before her eyes. And now here she was in the very heart of ranch country where horses were as common as breathing. "Miss, are you hurt?" A deep voice cut through her panic, and Eleanor looked up to see a tall man approaching on foot, leading his own mount at a respectful distance. He was perhaps 25 years old, with sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He wore dusty chaps over worn denim, a brown vest over a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. More importantly, he seemed to notice her rigid posture and the way her gaze kept darting to the horses. "I'm fine," Eleanor managed, though her voice shook. "Just shaken." The cowboy studied her for a long moment, then turned and led his horse even farther away, tying the reins to a scraggly mesquite tree before walking back to her. "Name's Cole Hastings. I've got a ranch about 2 miles north of here, saw the dust cloud from the accident and rode out to help." Eleanor tried to stand, wincing as her legs protested. She was 22 years old, a schoolteacher from Boston who had been traveling to Santa Fe to take a position at a new school for girls. Everything she owned had been in the trunk strapped to that stagecoach, and now the driver was telling the other passengers that they would need to wait for another coach to be sent from the next town over, which could take days. "Eleanor Whitmore," she introduced herself, accepting Cole's offered hand to steady herself. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle but secure. "Miss Whitmore, looks like you and the other passengers are going to need somewhere to stay while this gets sorted out." He gestured toward the disabled coach, where the elderly couple and the traveling salesman were gathering their scattered belongings. "My ranch isn't fancy, but we've got room and my sister keeps a proper house. You'd all be welcome." The thought of spending hours on horseback made Eleanor's stomach twist. "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly impose." Cole's expression softened with something like understanding. "It's a 2-hour walk in this heat, ma'am, and I'm guessing those shoes weren't made for the desert." He glanced down at her impractical leather boots, already scuffed and dust-covered. "But if you'd rather wait here for help, I understand." Eleanor looked around at the desolate landscape, the shimmering heat waves, the endless expanse of sand and scrub brush. The driver had already said he was riding to the next town for help, which meant she would be alone with strangers in the middle of nowhere. At least, Cole Hastings seemed genuinely concerned for her welfare, and the presence of his sister suggested propriety would be maintained. "I'll walk," she said firmly. Something flickered in Cole's eyes, respect perhaps, and he nodded. "Fair enough. Let me help the others get mounted and I'll walk with you." Eleanor watched as he efficiently organized the rescue, offering his horse to the elderly woman while arranging for the salesman and the old man to ride double on one of the coach horses, once it was calmed. His movements were economical and confident, and he spoke to each person with genuine courtesy. When he approached the horses, Eleanor had to turn away, her heart hammering at the sight of those enormous animals with their powerful legs and dangerous hooves. "Miss Whitmore." Cole was back at her side, a canteen in his hand. "Drink some water before we start. The sun's brutal today." She accepted gratefully, the water warm but wet, soothing her parched throat. Cole took a long drink himself, then gestured toward the north. "We'll take it slow. There's some shade about halfway." They set out across the desert, leaving the others to follow on horseback. Eleanor was acutely aware of Cole adjusting his long stride to match her shorter steps, and the way he positioned himself between her and the sun when he could. For the first 20 minutes, they walked in silence, the only sounds the crunch of boots on hard-packed earth and the distant cry of a hawk. "You're afraid of them," Cole said finally, and it wasn't a question. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "Is it that obvious? Only to someone who knows what to look for." He pulled his hat lower against the glare. "Had a younger brother who was terrified of dogs after one bit him. He used to go pale just hearing a bark. What happened to him?" Eleanor asked, then immediately regretted the question when she saw Cole's jaw tighten. "Fever took him when he was 12. That was 6 years ago." He was quiet for a moment. "But before he died, he'd learned to tolerate dogs again, even liked them at the end." "I'm sorry for your loss." Eleanor meant it sincerely. She had lost her own mother 3 years prior and still felt the absence like a hollow space in her chest. Cole nodded his thanks. "What made you afraid, if you don't mind my asking?" Eleanor hesitated, but something about the vast openness of the desert made confession easier. "I was 8 years old. My father had a stallion, a beautiful black thing he was very proud of. One day it got spooked by something, reared up and came down on our dog, crushed him right in front of me." The memory was still vivid, the sound of breaking bones, the awful whimpering that had stopped too quickly. "I haven't been able to go near a horse since. It's made traveling rather difficult." "I imagine it would, especially out here." Cole's voice was thoughtful. "Every ranch hand, every farmer, every person trying to make a living depends on horses. They're as essential as water." "I know." Eleanor's voice was small. "It's foolish." "It's not foolish," Cole said firmly. "Fear's never foolish when it comes from real pain, but it can be limiting." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "If you're going to be teaching in Santa Fe, you'll need to travel between town and wherever the school is. That usually means a buggy at minimum." Eleanor had been trying not to think about that particular problem. "I was hoping I could find lodgings close enough to walk." "Maybe," Cole said, though he sounded doubtful. "But winter's hard here, Miss Whitmore. Snow gets deep in the mountains. Even walking can be impossible sometimes." They reached the shade he had promised, an overhang of red rock that provided blessed relief from the sun. Cole insisted Eleanor rest while he kept watch, his gaze scanning the horizon with the automatic vigilance of someone used to watching for trouble. Eleanor studied him when she thought he wasn't looking, noting the laugh lines around his eyes despite his young age, the strong line of his jaw, the capable hands that rested easily on his belt. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked, more to break the silence than from real curiosity. 3 years now. My father left it to me and my sister when he passed. It's not much, just a few hundred acres and maybe 60 head of cattle, but it's ours." Pride colored his words. "Sarah, that's my sister. She's 17 and keeps threatening to go back east for school, but I think she loves this land too much to leave for long. You sound close." "She's all the family I've got left. Our mother died giving birth to the brother I mentioned, and like I said, he didn't make it to 13. Then Pa died of a heart condition 3 years back." Cole's expression was matter-of-fact rather than self-pitying. "Sarah and I take care of each other." Eleanor felt a kinship with this stranger. "I understand that. After my mother died, it was just my father and me. Then he remarried last year, and his new wife made it clear there wasn't room for both of us in the house." She tried to keep the bitterness from her voice. "That's partly why I took the teaching position, fresh start and all that." Cole looked at her with new understanding. "Running toward something or away from something? Both, I suppose." Eleanor smiled wryly. "Is that cowardly?" "No, ma'am, that's just being human." He stood and offered his hand again. "Ready to finish the walk? We're more than halfway there." The second half of the journey passed more quickly, their conversation flowing easier as they discovered shared experiences of loss and displacement. Cole told her about the challenges of ranching, the constant battle against drought and disease, and the occasional cattle rustler. Eleanor shared stories of teaching in Boston, the bright children she'd loved and the stuffy headmaster she hadn't. By the time the ranch buildings came into view, shimmering in the heat, Eleanor felt as though she had known Cole Hastings far longer than a few hours. The ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a main house of adobe and wood, a barn that looked sturdy, several outbuildings, and a network of corrals that made Eleanor's stomach clench. As they approached, a young woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the sun. She had Cole's dark hair but wore it in 2 long braids, and her face lit up when she saw her brother. "Cole, we saw the riders coming in. What happened?" Sarah Hastings was petite and pretty, with an open, friendly face and curious brown eyes. "Stagecoach accident," Cole explained. "Nobody seriously hurt, but they'll need hospitality until the line can send another coach. Sarah, this is Miss Eleanor Whitmore. She's going to be teaching in Santa Fe." Sarah's face brightened even more. "A teacher? Oh, how wonderful. Please come inside out of this dreadful heat. I've got lemonade and I just baked bread this morning." She took Eleanor's arm with easy familiarity, chattering as she led her toward the house. "You must be exhausted from that walk. Cole, why didn't you put her on dancer?" "Miss Whitmore preferred to walk," Cole said simply, and something in his tone made Sarah glance back at Eleanor with sudden understanding. The house was cool and surprisingly spacious inside, with whitewashed walls and simple but comfortable furniture. Sarah settled Eleanor in a rocking chair near the window and pressed a glass of tart, cold lemonade into her hands. The elderly couple from the stagecoach, introduced as Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, were already resting in the small parlor, and the salesman had apparently chosen to continue on to town with the driver. "You'll stay as long as needed," Sarah declared, moving around the kitchen with efficient grace. "We've got 2 spare rooms and it's no trouble at all." "Honestly, I'm starved for female company. Cole's ranch hands are perfectly nice, but they're not exactly conversationalists." Eleanor found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. "You're very kind. I promise we won't impose long." "Impose?" Sarah laughed. "This is the most excitement we've had in months." She began slicing the bread she had mentioned, the smell of it making Eleanor's stomach growl embarrassingly. "Cole, go tell Marcus to make sure the guest rooms are ready and check on the Pattersons' comfort." Cole tipped his hat to Eleanor before heading out, and Sarah caught the gesture, her eyes sparkling with interest. Once he was gone, she leaned across the table conspiratorially. "My brother walked 2 miles in the blazing sun with you instead of insisting you ride. That's not like him." "He's usually aggressively practical." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "I'm afraid of horses. He was being accommodating." "Afraid of horses?" Sarah's surprise was genuine. "Oh, you poor thing, that must make life out here terrifying." "Somewhat," Eleanor admitted. "Though your brother seems to think it's a surmountable problem." Sarah's expression turned thoughtful. "Did he now? That's interesting." Before Eleanor could ask what she meant, Sarah was already moving on. "Well, regardless, you're safe here. The horses stay in their corrals, and I'll make sure none of the hands bring them near the house while you're visiting." Over the next few hours, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Eleanor found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ranch. Sarah was delightful company, full of stories about ranch life and local gossip, and the Pattersons turned out to be heading to Santa Fe as well, where their son had established a mercantile. Dinner was a hearty affair of beef stew, fresh bread, and canned peaches, eaten around a large wooden table with Cole and his 3 ranch hands joining them. The hands were a diverse group. Marcus, a former slave who had come west after the war seeking freedom and opportunity. Juan, a Mexican vaquero with 30 years of ranching experience. And Tommy, a freckled kid of 19 who had been orphaned and taken in by Cole's father years ago. They were respectful and friendly, and Eleanor found herself enjoying their stories of life on the range, even when those stories inevitably involved horses. After dinner, as the sky turned purple and gold, Cole found Eleanor on the front porch where she had retreated to escape the heat of the house. "Mind if I join you? It's your porch," Eleanor said, but she smiled to soften any curtness in the words. Cole settled into the chair beside her, stretching out his long legs. For a while they simply sat in companionable silence, watching the stars begin to emerge. Finally, Cole spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier about being afraid." "Oh." Eleanor wasn't sure she wanted to revisit the topic. "I have a mare," Cole said slowly. "Name's Clover. She's 15 years old, which is getting up there for a horse, and she's the gentlest creature God ever made. My brother used to ride her before he got sick. Even when he was at his weakest, barely able to hold the reins, she'd walk as carefully as if she was carrying china." Eleanor's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think maybe, if you were willing, you could learn that not all horses are like the one that hurt you." Cole's voice was gentle but earnest. "I'm not saying you have to get over your fear all at once, but maybe, just maybe, you could meet Clover. Let her show you that some horses are as kind as any creature on earth." "I don't know," Eleanor whispered, her heart already racing at the thought. "No pressure," Cole assured her. "But the offer stands for as long as you're here. Sometimes the only way past fear is through it, even if you go through it real slow." Eleanor looked at him in the gathering darkness, this man she had known for less than a day who somehow seemed to understand her better than people she had known for years. "Why do you care? You barely know me." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "I guess because I see someone brave enough to come west alone, smart enough to teach children, and strong enough to walk 2 miles in the desert heat rather than face her fear. That's someone worth helping, seems to me." He stood, touched the brim of his hat. "Think about it, no obligation either way." That night, lying in the comfortable bed Sarah had prepared, Eleanor did think about it. She thought about Cole's kind eyes and gentle voice. She thought about his brother who had overcome his fear of dogs. She thought about the life she was trying to build in Santa Fe and how limiting it would be if she couldn't even approach a horse. But mostly she thought about the terror that had defined so much of her existence, the way it had shaped her choices and limited her world. When morning came, bright and already hot, Eleanor found Cole in the barn checking on a cow that was about to calf. She stood at the wide doorway, not quite willing to enter that dim space that smelled of hay and animals and leather. "Cole." He looked up from examining the cow, surprise and something else, maybe hope, crossing his face. "Miss Whitmore, everything all right? I want to meet Clover," Eleanor said before she could lose her nerve. "But I need you to understand that I might not be able to do more than look at her from a distance." Cole's smile was like sunrise. "That's more than good enough for a start. Let me just finish up here." 10 minutes later, Eleanor stood outside a small corral attached to the barn, her hands gripping the rough wood of the fence so tightly her knuckles were white. In the corral stood a stocky mare the color of honey, with a white blaze on her face and kind, dark eyes. Clover was munching hay, completely unbothered by the attention. "She's a Morgan horse," Cole explained, standing close enough that Eleanor could feel the steady calm radiating from him. "They're known for being good-tempered and intelligent. Clover here has never spooked at anything in her life, near as I can tell. She's seen rattlesnakes, mountain lions, thunderstorms, and gunfire, and she just keeps on being her sweet self." Eleanor watched the mare, noting the gentle way she moved, the relaxed set of her ears. "She's smaller than I expected. About 14 hands, which is average for a Morgan. She's strong, though. Carried my father, who was a big man, for over a decade without complaint." Cole opened the gate and stepped into the corral. "I'm going to bring her a little closer, if that's all right." "You just say if it's too much." Eleanor's instinct was to run, but she forced herself to stay rooted to the spot as Cole approached the mare with a handful of grain. Clover ambled over to him, her movements unhurried and peaceful. She lipped the grain from his palm, then nuzzled his shoulder affectionately. Cole stroked her neck, speaking to her in a low, soothing voice that Eleanor could barely hear. "See how her eyes are soft," Cole called to Eleanor. "And her ears are forward, relaxed. Those are signs of a calm horse. If she was scared or aggressive, her ears would be flat back and her eyes would be showing white." Eleanor forced herself to study the mare's features, to see past her own terror to the reality of the animal before her. Clover did look peaceful, even drowsy in the morning sun. As Cole led her closer to the fence, Eleanor's breath came faster, but she didn't move away. "That's real good, Eleanor," Cole said, and the use of her first name sent a little thrill through her despite her fear. "You're doing great. Clover, this is Miss Eleanor. She's going to be your friend." The mare was now close enough that Eleanor could see the individual whiskers on her soft nose, the way her nostrils flared gently with each breath. Up close, she seemed less like a monster and more like a living creature with her own personality. Still terrifying, but perhaps not quite as impossibly so. "I can't," Eleanor said suddenly, stepping back from the fence. Her heart was hammering so hard she felt dizzy. "I'm sorry, I thought I could, but I can't." "That's fine," Cole said immediately, not a trace of disappointment in his voice. "You did real well for a first time. How about you go on up to the house and I'll be along shortly?" Eleanor fled, feeling like a coward but unable to stop herself. She found Sarah in the kitchen preparing breakfast and must have looked distraught because Sarah immediately sat her down and pressed a cup of coffee into her hands. "Cole told me he was going to introduce you to Clover," Sarah said gently. "How did it go?" "I made it about 5 minutes before I panicked," Eleanor said miserably. "I'm pathetic." "You're not pathetic," Sarah said firmly. "You're scared, which is different. And from what Cole told me about how you got that way, you've got every right to be." She sat down across from Eleanor. "Can I tell you something? When Cole and I were younger, our mother used to can peaches every summer. She'd make dozens of jars to get us through the winter. The summer she died, I was in the kitchen with her when she collapsed. I found her surrounded by broken jars and peach juice, and I couldn't save her." Eleanor looked at Sarah with new understanding. "I'm so sorry. For years, I couldn't eat peaches," Sarah continued. "Couldn't even smell them without feeling sick. Cole understood, never pushed me. But then one day, about 2 years after she died, I was walking past a peach tree and I stopped. I made myself stand there and smell the blossoms. It hurt, but it also reminded me of good things, of her laugh and the way she'd let me steal the peach slices before they went in the jars." Sarah reached across and squeezed Eleanor's hand. "What I'm saying is, healing happens in its own time. Cole knows that. He won't push you faster than you can go." Over the next 3 days, as the stagecoach company worked to send a replacement coach, Eleanor settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She helped Sarah with cooking and mending, taught Tommy to read better when she discovered his education had been spotty, and spent long evenings on the porch talking with Cole about everything from philosophy to practical matters of frontier life. The attraction between them grew with each conversation, each shared smile, each moment when their hands accidentally brushed and neither pulled away. And every morning, Eleanor made herself walk to the corral where Clover lived. Sometimes she could only stand there for a minute before the panic drove her away. Sometimes she managed 5 minutes, watching as Cole groomed the mare or fed her treats. On the 4th morning, Eleanor surprised herself by speaking to the horse directly. "Hello, Clover," she said, her voice shaking only a little. "I'm sorry I'm such a coward about you." The mare's ear swiveled toward her voice, and those dark eyes regarded Eleanor with what seemed like infinite patience. Cole, who had been mucking out the stall nearby, set down his pitchfork and came to stand beside the fence, though not so close that he crowded Eleanor. "She knows you're trying," Cole said quietly. "Horses are good at sensing intention. Do you really think I can overcome this?" Eleanor asked, surprising herself with the question. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to," Cole said, and the conviction in his voice made Eleanor's chest tighten with emotion. "But more importantly, what do you think?" Eleanor considered this, watching as Clover went back to her hay. "I think I'm tired of being ruled by fear. I think I want to be the kind of person who can live out here without being paralyzed by the most common animal in the territory." She paused. "I think I want to try." Cole's smile was radiant. "Then let's try real slow." They started with Eleanor entering the corral, which took nearly 20 minutes and more courage than she knew she possessed. Cole stayed right beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. Clover remained at the far end of the corral, eating hay and paying them no mind. See. "You're in here with her and nothing bad is happening," Cole pointed out. "You're safe, she's safe, everyone's fine." Eleanor's laugh was slightly hysterical, but she was doing it. She was standing in an enclosure with a horse and she hadn't fainted or fled. Now what? "Now we just stand here," Cole said. "Let yourself get used to sharing space with her. There's no hurry." They stood there for perhaps 10 minutes, and gradually Eleanor felt her racing heart begin to slow. Clover occasionally glanced their way but seemed utterly unconcerned with their presence. Finally, Cole spoke again. "Want to try moving a little closer?" Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. Step by step, with Cole matching her pace, they crossed half the corral. Clover watched them approach with mild interest, still chewing methodically. When they were about 10 feet away, Eleanor stopped. "That's far enough for today." "You did amazing," Cole said, and the pride in his voice made Eleanor feel warm despite the morning chill that hadn't yet burned off. "Tomorrow, if you want, we can try again." That night, lying in bed, Eleanor admitted something to herself that she had been trying to ignore. She was falling in love with Cole Hastings. It was absurd, really. She had known him less than a week. But there was something about his patience, his kindness, his quiet strength that spoke to something deep in her soul. The way he understood her fear without judgment, the way he pushed her to grow without forcing her, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and worth protecting. It all combined to make her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with horses. The stagecoach company sent word that a replacement coach would arrive in 2 more days. The Pattersons, who had been content to rest and recover, began talking about completing their journey. Sarah looked genuinely sad at the prospect of losing her new friend. And Cole became quieter, more withdrawn, spending long hours out on the range. "He doesn't want you to go," Sarah confided to Eleanor as they washed dishes after dinner. "I can see it in the way he looks at you." "We barely know each other," Eleanor protested weakly. "Out here, people don't have the luxury of long courtships and years of acquaintance," Sarah said practically. "You learn pretty quick if someone is right for you or not, and Cole hasn't looked at anyone the way he looks at you, not ever." She dried a plate and set it aside. "Question is, how do you feel about him?" Eleanor couldn't lie, not to Sarah who had been so kind. "I think I might love him, but I have a teaching position waiting in Santa Fe. I can't just abandon that." "Can't you?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Santa Fe's not going anywhere. And good men like my brother, well, they don't come around every day." She paused, then added more gently, "But I'm not saying you should give up your dreams either. Just that maybe there's a way to have both. Santa Fe's only a day's ride from here. You could teach and still, well, visit." Eleanor's mind whirled with possibilities she hadn't let herself consider. Could she really build a life that included both her independence and this unexpected love? Did Cole even want that? They had shared looks and meaningful conversations, but he had never spoken of his feelings directly. The next morning, knowing her time was running short, Eleanor approached Cole with determination. "I want to touch Clover today." Cole's eyes widened. "Are you sure? There's no rush, Eleanor." "Yes, there is," she said quietly. "The coach comes tomorrow and I need to know I can do this. I need to know I'm not the same scared girl I was a week ago." They went to the corral together, and this time Eleanor moved with more confidence. Clover, bless her patient heart, stood perfectly still as Cole brought Eleanor right up to her side. Up close, the mare was even larger and more imposing than Eleanor had realized, but she was also warm and alive, her coat glossy in the morning sun, her breathing deep and even. "Put your hand out flat like this," Cole demonstrated, holding his palm out for Clover to sniff. The mare's nose, velvet soft and whiskery, explored his hand gently. "Now you try." Eleanor's hand shook as she extended it, but she forced herself to hold steady. Clover's breath was warm against her skin, and then that soft nose was touching her palm, investigating her scent with gentle curiosity. Eleanor gasped, tears springing to her eyes, but she didn't pull away. She was touching a horse. After 14 years of terror, she was actually touching a horse. "Good girl," Cole murmured, and Eleanor wasn't sure if he was talking to her or Clover. "Now, if you're ready, you can try stroking her neck. Right here where I'm touching." Cole's hand was on Clover's shoulder, moving in slow, soothing circles. Eleanor reached out with her other hand, trembling, and placed it beside his. The mare's coat was surprisingly soft, warm from the sun, and under Eleanor's palm she could feel the powerful muscles, the living strength of the animal. But Clover remained still and calm, as patient as a saint. "I'm doing it," Eleanor whispered, wonder in her voice. "Cole, I'm really doing it." "You're so brave," Cole said, and when Eleanor looked at him, she found his face very close to hers, his eyes intense with emotion. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something before that coach comes tomorrow." "What?" Her voice was barely audible, her hand still on Clover's neck as if the horse was anchoring her to this moment. "I know we haven't known each other long," Cole began, then seemed to gather his courage. "But out here, you learn to recognize what matters pretty quick. And you matter, Eleanor. These past days with you have been the happiest I can remember in years. The way you laugh at my terrible jokes, the way you helped Tommy with his reading, the way you faced your fear with such courage, it all makes me think that maybe you could see a future here. With me." Eleanor's heart was pounding again, but this time not from fear. "Cole, I have a teaching position." "I know," he said quickly, "and I wouldn't ask you to give that up. You're a teacher and the children in Santa Fe need you, but Santa Fe's close enough for visiting, for courting proper-like. And maybe, if things went well between us, you could teach in the new school they're talking about building in town, just 5 miles from here." He took a breath. "I'm not asking you to give up who you are, Eleanor. I'm asking if you'd consider building a life that includes me in it." Eleanor stood there, one hand on the horse that had terrified her for so long, the other now clasped in Cole's calloused palm, and felt something shift inside her. This was what courage really meant, not the absence of fear but the willingness to face it, to move through it toward something worth having. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, I'd like that very much." Cole's whoop of joy startled Clover, who sidled away a few steps, but Eleanor barely noticed. She was too busy being swept into Cole's arms, held tight against his chest as he spun her around. When he set her down, his hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite his obvious excitement. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, always so careful of her comfort, and Eleanor answered by rising on her toes to meet him halfway. The kiss was sweet and full of promise, tasting of hope and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "We'll make this work, Eleanor, I promise you that." "I know we will," Eleanor said, believing it with her whole heart. The stagecoach arrived the next day as promised, and Eleanor boarded it with mixed feelings. She was eager to begin her teaching position, but leaving Cole and Sarah felt like tearing away a part of herself she had only just discovered. Still, they had made plans. Cole would come to Santa Fe in 2 weeks to visit, and Eleanor would return to the ranch the following month. They would write letters, court properly, and see where this love might lead them. As the coach pulled away, Eleanor looked back to see Cole standing beside Clover, one hand raised in farewell. She raised her own hand in response, no longer afraid of the horse that stood so peacefully beside the man she loved. The fear that had defined her for so long was not entirely gone. She suspected it might never completely disappear, but it no longer controlled her. She had faced it, moved through it, and come out the other side stronger and braver than she had ever imagined possible. Santa Fe welcomed Eleanor with open arms. The school was small but well-appointed, with 15 students ranging from ages 6 to 14. Eleanor threw herself into teaching with passion, discovering that she had a talent for reaching even the most difficult students. Her accommodations were modest but comfortable, a small room in the boarding house run by a kind widow named Mrs. Chen. True to his word, Cole arrived exactly 2 weeks later, riding into town on Clover herself, which made Eleanor laugh and cry at the same time. They spent 3 days walking through Santa Fe's dusty streets, visiting the plaza, attending a dance at the church hall, and talking endlessly about their hopes and dreams. When he left, it was with Eleanor's promise that she would visit the ranch in 3 weeks. The courtship that followed was unconventional but deeply satisfying. Eleanor would travel to the ranch on weekends and during school breaks, at first by stagecoach but gradually, with Cole's patient help, learning to ride in a buggy with Clover pulling it. The gentle Mare seemed to understand her fear and never moved faster than a sedate walk, at least not when Eleanor held the reins. Sarah became not just a friend, but the sister Eleanor had never had. The ranch became a second home, a place where Eleanor could shed her teacher persona and simply be herself, laughing and working and slowly, steadily, learning to be comfortable around the horses that were such an integral part of ranch life. One evening, about 6 months after their first meeting, Cole took Eleanor riding. She sat in front of him on Clover's broad back, his arms around her holding the reins, and they rode out to a spot overlooking the ranch where the sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "This is where I come when I need to think," Cole told her, his voice rumbling in his chest against her back. "I wanted to share it with you." "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, and she meant it. The land that had seemed so harsh and alien when she first arrived now held a rugged beauty that spoke to her soul. "Eleanor," Cole said, and something in his tone made her twist in the saddle to look at him. "I love you. I've loved you since you were brave enough to walk 2 miles in the heat rather than face your fear, and I've loved you more with each day that passes. I know we said we'd take things slow, court proper-like, but I can't wait any longer to ask you this." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple gold band with a single small diamond. "It was my mother's," Cole explained. "Will you marry me, Eleanor? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 2 months later in the small church in town, with Sarah as Eleanor's maid of honor and Marcus standing up as Cole's best man. The Pattersons came back from their son's place to attend, delighted to see the romance they had witnessed the beginning of come to fruition. Eleanor's father sent his blessing and a generous check, but did not attend, his new wife claiming she was too delicate for the journey. Eleanor found she didn't mind. The family that mattered was there. Sarah, the ranch hands who had become like brothers, Mrs. Chen and her students from school, and most importantly, Cole himself, looking handsome and slightly overwhelmed in his Sunday best. Eleanor continued teaching for another year, making the journey between Santa Fe and the ranch until the town finally built its own school and she could take a position closer to home. By then, she was 3 months pregnant with their first child, and the daily travel was becoming difficult. She was also, to her great surprise and pride, able to ride Clover by herself, though she still preferred the patient Mare to any of the livelier horses in the stable. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1880, with Sarah assisting the doctor and Cole pacing anxiously outside until he was allowed in to meet his child. They named her Rose, and she had Eleanor's green eyes and Cole's dark hair. She was followed 2 years later by a son they called James, after Cole's brother, and then 2 years after that by another daughter, Margaret, who they called Maggie. The ranch prospered under Cole's management, growing from a few hundred acres to over 1,000, from 60 head of cattle to nearly 300. Eleanor's teaching was supplemented by her writing, articles about frontier life that she sold to Eastern magazines, giving city dwellers a glimpse of the challenges and rewards of Western living. Together, they built a life that honored both their needs: Eleanor's desire for intellectual stimulation and purpose, and Cole's deep connection to the land and the ranching life. As the children grew, Eleanor taught them all to read and appreciate learning, while Cole taught them to ride and care for the animals. Rose, in particular, inherited her father's way with horses, and by the time she was 10, she was helping break the young colts with a skill that made Cole's eyes shine with pride. James was more interested in the business side of ranching, always asking questions about prices and markets and how to negotiate better deals. And Maggie, the baby, had a gift for growing things, turning the patch of dirt near the house into a vegetable garden that fed them through the long winters. Sarah eventually did go east for school, studying at a women's college in Massachusetts for 3 years. But she came back, as Cole had predicted, bringing with her a husband she had met there, a lawyer named David who adapted to ranch life with good humor and determination. They built a house on the edge of Cole and Eleanor's land and started their own family, 3 boys who grew up alongside Eleanor and Cole's children like cousins and best friends. On their 10th anniversary, Cole took Eleanor back to the spot where he had proposed, riding double on Clover just as they had that first time. The old mare was 25 now, gray around her muzzle and a little stiff in her joints, but she still carried them with her characteristic patience and care. "You ever regret it?" Cole asked, his arms around Eleanor as they watched another sunset paint the desert. "Giving up Boston, staying out here in the middle of nowhere." Eleanor leaned back against him, thinking of her 3 healthy children, her work at the school that she loved, the students whose lives she had touched, the community they had built, and most of all, the man whose steady love had given her the courage to face her fears and build a life she had never imagined possible. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." "I'm glad," Cole said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "because I can't imagine my life without you in it." As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering twilight, Eleanor reflected on how much had changed since that day 10 years ago, when a stagecoach accident had left her stranded in the desert. She had been so afraid then, of horses and of the unknown, of building a life in this harsh and beautiful land. But fear, she had learned, was not the opposite of courage. Courage was feeling the fear and moving forward anyway, trusting that on the other side of that fear might be something wonderful. And she had been right. On the other side of her fear, she had found love, family, purpose, and a home that encompassed not just the physical ranch but the entire landscape of her heart. She had faced her terror and discovered that the gentlest Mare and the patient Cowboy who introduced them had changed her life forever. The years continued to roll by with their mixture of challenges and joys. There were hard winters when the snow piled high and they worried about the cattle, and dry summers when water was scarce and every drop precious. There were illnesses that scared them, particularly when Rose came down with scarlet fever at age 12, and they spent 2 weeks not knowing if she would survive. But she did, tough as her father, and the experience only seemed to make her more determined to live life fully. There were financial struggles too. Years when the cattle prices dropped and they had to make do with less, mending clothes until they could be mended no more, and eating simple meals of beans and cornbread. But there were also good years. Years when the rains came at the right time and the cattle were healthy and the prices were strong, and they could afford little luxuries like store-bought candy for the children or a new dress for Sarah. Through it all, Cole and Eleanor's love deepened and matured, growing from the passionate intensity of new love into something richer and more complex, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared struggles, and countless small acts of kindness and understanding. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, knew when to speak and when to offer silent comfort, when to push and when to hold back. Eleanor never completely lost her wariness of horses, but she learned to work with it rather than being paralyzed by it. She was never the fearless rider that Rose became, never completely comfortable on any horse but Clover and, after Clover's peaceful death at age 28, on Clover's daughter Sweetpea, who inherited her mother's patient temperament. But that was all right. She had faced her fear enough to live the life she wanted, and that was victory enough. When Rose turned 18, She announced that she wanted to start breeding horses, specifically focusing on gentle, patient animals suitable for children and nervous riders. It was Eleanor's own journey that had inspired her. Rose explained, watching her mother gradually overcome her fear to become a competent if cautious rider. Cole gifted Rose a portion of land and enough money to buy 3 good mares and a quality stallion, and within a few years, Rose's horses were in demand throughout the territory, known for their even temperaments and reliability. James, true to his childhood interests, went to college in Denver to study business and returned with ideas for expanding the ranch's operations, diversifying into sheep as well as cattle, and establishing direct relationships with buyers in Chicago and Kansas City. Under his management, the ranch's profits grew significantly, allowing them to buy more land and hire more hands. Maggie, who had always been the quietest of the 3 children, surprised everyone by becoming a writer like her mother, but her focus was fiction rather than journalism. Her stories of frontier life, populated with strong women and honorable men facing the challenges of the West, found an eager audience. She married the town's doctor, a kind man named Peter who appreciated her gentle nature and her gift with words. As Cole and Eleanor entered their 50s, they gradually turned over more of the ranch's daily operations to James while still remaining involved in major decisions. They had earned the right to slow down a little, to spend more time with their growing brood of grandchildren, to simply enjoy the life they had built together. One evening, sitting on the porch that had been the site of so many important conversations in their lives, Eleanor and Cole watched the sun set over land that now belonged as much to their children and grandchildren as to them. Cole's hair was liberally streaked with gray now, and Eleanor's had gone almost entirely silver, but his hand in hers was as warm and strong as it had been the day he helped her to her feet after the stagecoach accident. "You remember the first thing I said to you?" Cole asked, his voice still deep and steady even if it lacked some of its youthful vigor. "You asked if I was hurt," Eleanor recalled, smiling at the memory. "And I lied and said I was fine even though I was terrified." "I knew you were scared," Cole admitted. "I could see it in every line of your body, but I also saw your determination, the way you refused to give in to that fear. That's when I started falling for you, I think, before I even knew your name." "I fell for you when you walked 2 miles in the blazing heat just to accommodate my irrational terror," Eleanor countered. "That's when I knew you were someone special." "It wasn't irrational," Cole corrected gently, as he had so many times over the years. "It was real, and it was based on real trauma. There's nothing irrational about that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night, the lowing of cattle, the whinny of horses, the distant laughter of their grandchildren playing before bedtime. This was the sound of home, the symphony of a life well lived. "I'm glad that stagecoach broke down," Eleanor said suddenly. "Is that terrible? I mean, it could have been a disaster, people could have been seriously hurt, but it brought me to you and I can't regret that." "I'm glad too," Cole agreed, "though I'd have found you somehow, I think. Some things are just meant to be." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible in those frightened days after her mother's death, when her father's new wife had made it clear she was unwelcome, when she had boarded that stagecoach headed west with more trepidation than hope. "Tell me something," she said. "When you first saw me standing by that boulder, shaking and pale, did you ever imagine it would come to this, all of this?" She gestured at the ranch, the family, the life they had built. Cole was quiet for a moment, considering. "I imagined you might be someone worth knowing," he said finally. "I imagined that anyone brave enough to come west alone to face the unknown like that had to have steel in their spine under all that fear. But did I imagine falling in love with you, having a family with you? Building this life together?" He squeezed her hand. "That exceeded anything I could have imagined. You exceeded anything I could have imagined." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes and she blinked them away. After more than 30 years of marriage, Cole could still move her to tears with his quiet declarations of love. "You saved me," she said softly. "Not just from my fear of horses, but from a life half-lived, controlled by terror and limitation. You gave me the courage to be more than I thought I could be." "No," Cole said firmly. "I just showed you what was already there. The courage was always yours, Eleanor. I just helped you find it." As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge in their countless millions, Cole and Eleanor remained on the porch, holding hands and reflecting on the journey that had brought them from that chance meeting in the desert to this moment of perfect peace and contentment. The Wild West that had seemed so frightening to a young woman from Boston had become home, a place of belonging and purpose and deep, abiding love. Inside the house, they could hear Sarah directing the grandchildren to bed, her voice patient and warm. David's deeper tones joined in, followed by the children's protests and laughter. Rose and her husband had stayed for dinner and were probably helping clean up. James and his wife were in the study, going over accounts. Maggie and Peter would be in the guest room, as they often stayed overnight when visiting. This was the legacy Eleanor and Cole had built together. Not just a successful ranch or financial security, but a family knit together by love and mutual respect, a community that supported and strengthened each other. Their children had grown into capable, kind adults who were raising their own children with the same values. The ranch would continue for generations, adapting and changing as the West itself changed, but always rooted in the foundation that Cole and Eleanor had established through their hard work and dedication. "We should go in," Eleanor said eventually, though neither of them moved. "Sarah will worry if we stay out too late." "Just another minute," Cole said, and Eleanor settled back against him, content to sit a little longer under the stars with the man who had taught her that love was worth any risk. That courage came in many forms, and that sometimes the things we fear the most can lead us to the greatest blessings. When they finally did go inside, Cole held the door for Eleanor as he always did, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back as he had done countless times over the years. In the warm glow of the lamplight, surrounded by the noise and chaos and love of their family, Eleanor looked at Cole and saw not just the handsome cowboy who had rescued her all those years ago, but her partner, her best friend, the father of her children, and the love of her life. "I love you," she said, simple words that carried the weight of decades. "I love you too," Cole replied, his smile as warm and genuine as it had been on that first day. "Always have, always will." And that, Eleanor thought as she moved into the comfortable chaos of family evening, was the greatest adventure of all. Not conquering her fear of horses, not building a life in the wild frontier, but finding a love that sustained and strengthened her through every challenge, every joy, every ordinary moment of an extraordinary life. The frightened woman who had stood trembling beside an overturned stagecoach could never have imagined this future. But the woman she had become, strong and confident and deeply loved, could not imagine any other. As the years advanced into their 60s and then 70s, Cole and Eleanor's pace slowed further, but their love never did. They spent their days in quiet contentment, walking through the ranch that had been the backdrop of their entire adult lives, visiting with children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. They had earned their rest, earned the right to sit on the porch and reminisce about the adventures of their youth, the struggles they had overcome, and the love that had seen them through it all. When Cole passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78 with Eleanor's hand in his, she grieved deeply but not desperately. They had lived a full life together, loved deeply and well, raised a good family, and built something lasting. She missed him with an ache that never fully went away, but she also felt profound gratitude for the 53 years they had shared, for every moment from that first meeting to his final breath. Eleanor lived another 5 years after Cole's death, remaining sharp and engaged until the end. She continued writing, mentoring her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and serving as the matriarch of the family Cole had helped her build. When her time came, she faced it with the same courage she had learned to face all of life's challenges, secure in the knowledge that she had lived well and loved completely. She was buried beside Cole on a hill overlooking the ranch, the same hill where he had proposed all those years ago. The entire family gathered for the funeral, 3 generations united in their grief and their gratitude for the legacy Eleanor and Cole had left them. Rose, now a grandmother herself, spoke at the service about her mother's courage, about how a woman terrified of horses had learned not just to tolerate them but to appreciate their beauty and usefulness, and how that lesson about facing fear had shaped all their lives. The ranch continues today, run by James's son with the same dedication and integrity that Cole brought to it. Rose's breeding program has become renowned throughout the region, producing gentle, reliable horses that carry on Clover's legacy of patience and kindness. Maggie's books sit in libraries and on bookshelves, ensuring that the story of the frontier, as seen through the eyes of a woman who lived it, will not be forgotten. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the family gathers on that same porch where Cole and Eleanor spent so many hours, and they tell the story of how it all began, with a frightened woman and a patient cowboy, and a gentle mare named Clover who taught them all that love and courage can transform even the deepest fear into something beautiful and lasting. It is a story of the Wild West, of hardship and perseverance, of building a life from dust and dreams. But most of all, it is a love story, a testament to the power of one person seeing another's fear and offering not judgment but compassion, not force but patience, not demands but gentle invitation to be brave. And in that offering, in that moment when Cole introduced Eleanor to his gentlest mare, both their lives were transformed forever, creating a legacy that would echo through generations. A reminder that the greatest adventures often begin with the courage to face what frightens us most.